In front of me are 2 cups of coffee. They look very much the same. But what I'm going to tell you is that they're different. And what makes them different can come from a multitude of things. Perhaps the most important, and the one we're going to talk about today, is where they came from, the origin. I'm Major Cohen, part of the coffee team at Cumulus, head educator. Welcome to the Cold Brew Lab. What I'll tell you right from the start is that I'm a coffee guy. I've been a coffee guy for as long as I can remember, but really since the 1970s. I started really as a consumer and then working in the industry where I had the opportunity to travel all over the world exploring that world of coffee. For over 50 years, cold coffee has been a second-class citizen. People pay a great deal of attention to hot coffee. When it comes to cold, it was always an afterthought. It was, we'll brew you an iced coffee. We'll basically make your coffee hot and put ice in it. What I'm going to tell you is that now, because of the work that Cumulus has done, which really involves every part of bringing great coffee to the cup that you're going to drink from, has changed the way cold coffee is coming to consumers. To date, only Cumulus has done the work in order to create a perfect cup of cold coffee. In this series, we're going to explore cold brew, nitro, the flavor wheel, origins, and roasting. And we're going to learn everything that Cumulus has done to dig deep into the world of coffee to create an amazing coffee experience. You've probably tasted so many coffees. Some of them you loved. Some of them you said, I'm never going to drink this coffee again. And you probably wondered why. I'm going to explain to you why origin, where the coffee comes from, is a huge part of understanding those differences. And in the end, you'll be able to make much more informed decisions about your coffee choices, and origin will be at the base of those decisions. Most people, when they think about coffee, they think that roast is the most important thing. When I begin to think about it, the story begins way earlier than that. What they don't understand is that coffee is a fruit crop. It starts with a seed that's put into the ground. And where it's put into the ground is hugely important. So we're going to travel to some amazing places as we explore origin. Imagine the globe. And around the equator is something that we talk about called the bean belt. Within that band, continents where coffee is grown have some specific characteristics where coffee grows the best. The first, hugely important, is the climate. The climate in most of those places is lots of rain, lots of good temperature, lots of moderation in those temperatures. And what we've learned is that coffee grows better in those tropical climates where there is humidity and there are high temperatures. Now, one of the interesting factors is that when you add in elevation, think of the hot day and what happens at night. Well, the higher you go up the mountain, the more the temperature drops in the evening. And what happens is that there's a differential. As we explore the world of coffee, we can go to the same mountain in Guatemala or Colombia, and we can find coffee at the bottom of the mountain, go up the mountain and find very similar coffee trees and pick the coffee from those trees, and later compare it to the coffee that came from the trees that were at lower elevation. Same mountain, same climate, but the differential in temperature has created a different result in the cherry that eventually becomes the bean that we eventually roast and brew. If you had the same coffee plant and you took it from Ethiopia and you moved it to Guatemala, and you would assume that after it got healthy and began to give you fruit, it would be the same. And the answer is that it wouldn't, because there are things happening within the origin that have to do with its particular climate, its particular soil. All of those elements come into play. And so in each of the origins that we're going to explore, we're going to discover that there are certain tastes that come from those places. Now fold that in with high up the mountain, low in the mountain, then you begin to see how coffee becomes what it is. What makes that great cup of coffee related to origin, where it came from, how it was grown, different from the one that is perhaps not as great. So now we're going to go to Central and Latin America. And I'm going to take you there through Cumulus Ritual, medium roast. So let's talk about Ritual. We already know that it comes from somewhere. I said it comes from Latin and Central America. It comes from Brazil, Colombia, and Guatemala. It's a blend of 3 coffees. Ritual was the first coffee that we created with Cumulus as we developed the line. Now let me talk a little bit about the taste of Ritual and how it links to those origins, those countries that it comes from. So think about Brazil. Brazil is a huge producer of coffee, largest producer in the world. The core of many, many blends come from Brazil because Brazilian coffees have a lovely centeredness. They are extraordinarily delicious when they're carefully grown and nurtured. They become the base for Ritual. To that base, in order to create some complexity, we go to two countries that deliver really complex coffees. One is Colombia, one is Guatemala. Colombian coffees are known for their kind of nuttiness and chocolatey. And then for a little bit of distinction, we add a Guatemalan coffee. Guatemalan coffees are known for their distinct flavor notes, as well as sometimes roasting brings out some acidity in those that begins to add an element. The key to a great blend is that when you taste it, you should find a little of the Brazil, you should get a hint of some of the Colombian and Guatemalan, and what that becomes in your mouth is a really complex experience. And because, as I said, Ritual Medium especially is centered in our lineup, you get all of those attributes in a kind of a lovely symphony. Okay, so we talked about Ritual, Brazil, Colombia, and Guatemala. What I want to do now is I want to do something that is unique to the Cumulus lineup, and that is I want to present for you a second coffee, Valor. Valor has Colombia, so we already know a little bit about Colombia as an origin. The origin that's also included in Valor as part of the blend is Sumatra in Indonesia, perhaps the most remote place that coffee comes from. And Sumatran coffees are known in the world as some of the most unusual tasting coffees. Where does that taste come from? All the things we've talked about. They're earthy, they're rich, sometimes vegetal. Now, what did we do at Cumulus? We took some Colombian and we coupled it with some coffees from Sumatra, beautiful coffees from Sumatra. And we created a blend which is very different in taste from the Ritual. These are just two of the coffees that we have in our lineup. Where they come from is an important factor in understanding how they come to be so different. There's one more thing you need to understand about origin that links it to all that you experience in your cup, and it has to do with processing. Remember that I said that we're growing a fruit on a tree. Well, in order to get to the coffee that we're going to eventually roast, we need to take off the stuff on the outside, and we call that processing. Now, it's a very easy way to understand a very complex process. When we process coffee, taking the outside off, in Latin and Central America, they most often wash their coffee. What that means is they take off the outside, and then they put the coffee through a process with lots of water and water tanks. In Africa, in the Arabian Peninsula, another origin, they don't use water. They often take the coffee, dry the entire bean with the stuff around it. It becomes shriveled up. They take that stuff off later, and there you have a natural coffee, naturally processed. So you have washed and natural. In the middle, you have semi-washed. They use water, but they don't use a lot of water. And really, the place you see that the most is in Sumatra. So those three processing methods are most often linked to the places that we've been. Latin and Central America, most often washed. Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, most often natural. And then in Sumatra, you have semi-washed. So you might have wondered, how do we buy coffee? Quite honestly, it's the way everybody buys coffee in the world. We know there's coffee growing in all those places we've talked about. Thousands and thousands of coffee farms. And we have partners in the business all over the world who are helping us keep aware of what's happening in those places where great coffee is being grown. And quite honestly, to simplify it, we get coffee from all these sources, bringing coffee through the supply chain, and eventually many of those coffees end up in the hands of the Cumulus Coffee department. And we begin to sample thousands of cups of coffee from all over the world in order to make our decisions about which coffees we want to get. What's important to us as the buyer? Well, quite honestly, it's equally important to the people who are helping us in country, and it's equally important to the people who are growing the coffee, that we have what I'm going to call a relationship with them. And we don't go there all the time. We've been to the places, we've met many of them. But what they do in origin is key for us in the end. Now, what do? Well, they grow the coffee. So we expect them to grow the coffee using the best practices. They couldn't deliver the flavor if they didn't do that. But then there are other elements that become key in the relationship that we have with them. The first is really about money. When you have a relationship like this, we want to make sure they get paid a fair price, and everybody who's working on the coffee gets paid a fair price. That's key. Once we're past that, it's important, if you really approach it in the right way, is to make sure that you pay attention to the way that the people live, where the coffee's coming from. What are the social conditions? How are they enjoying their lives? And what could we do as the buyer to make sure that our purchase with them is ensuring that they have the best life wherever they are? And then the last piece is key, because the environment is a key element in growing coffee. It's an agricultural product. So we have to be sure that the places where the coffee's coming from are taking care of the world that we live in. Take it all together, we want to make sure that they're getting a fair price, that the environmental and social conditions are addressed wherever they are, and most importantly, in the end, that the coffee that we're tasting is the best possible coffee we could ever bring. Here's what you can do now, thanks to the great chance that we had in the coffee lab to be together. We've been to some places, so perhaps you understand now a little better why Colombia is a different origin than Sumatra, and how that translates in what you taste. You probably understand the bean belt. Maybe you never heard of it before, but that band around the equator where coffee comes from. 3 specific areas, Latin, Central America, Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula, over here to Indonesia, you've got different places that coffee comes from. And the reason that it's great to know those things is because it's going to help you understand better what you will like in a cup of coffee. You can approach your coffee in a different way. Was it important to you where it came from in the past? Perhaps you knew a little bit about that place, but you didn't understand the link between that place and the coffee that you might select. Why choosing a coffee from Sumatra may be a different choice than choosing a coffee from Colombia or Guatemala or Brazil. We've done that in this lab. You understand the difference, and so to a small degree, we hope we've helped you understand so that you are a more informed consumer. All right, in front of me are 2 cups of coffee. Now you know why they might be different. By going to origin, we've explored this idea that where the coffee comes from is key in how it might be different when you end up tasting it. In our next episode, we're going to talk about nitro. That's right, nitro cold brew, nitrogen. I'm Major Cohen. Thanks for joining us in the Coffee Lab.